They said it was just a shortcut. A little road through open pasture, no big deal. They didn't ask, they didn't warn. They tore down my fence, drove their SUVs across my grazing land, and called it community development. But what they didn't know was that bulls remember. And when HOA Karen led her board onto my private ranch against the law, against court orders, she thought she was building a future. Instead, she woke a storm. 2,000 pounds of vuttle. A bloodline older than her HOA charter. And a fence line that wasn't just barbed wire, it was legacy. She thought I was the threat. But it was never me. It was the land. And the moment she crossed it, there was no going back. This isn't just another HOA story. It's justice on four hooves. Watch what happens when one homeowner fights back, not with lawyers, but with bulls. They say in the country fences don't just keep livestock in, they keep understanding in place. I've lived by that truth my whole life. My name is Malcolm Hayes. I'm a retired Army logistics officer who traded desert sand for rich pasture grass raising cattle on the same 38 acres my grandfather fenced with his own hands back in 1952. This land has carried 3 generations of Hayes men through lean years and bountiful ones alike. It fed us, taught us, and gave my 2 boys, Grant and Ben, the kind of childhood that builds bone-deep strength and a quiet kind of pride. We run purebred Charolais bulls here, massive white beasts, each one a solid ton of muscle and raw power. To those who know them, they're gentle giants, calm enough to take a scratch behind the ear without flinching. But they are still bulls. Territorial, proud, protective of their herd and their ground. Step into their pasture uninvited and you're not just trespassing on property, you're challenging something ancient and instinctive. That's why the fences matter more than almost anything else on this ranch. Every strand of barbed wire, every cedar post driven deep into red clay carries a story. We inspect them every month, repair them the same week a storm bends a staple, because those boundaries aren't just wood and steel. They're a covenant between man and land. You respect my space, and I'll respect the wild in yours. Our house sits at the base of a low ridge, looking south across the main pasture, toward the newer subdivision that crept in over the last decade's Summerhill crossings. Where once there were only rolling hayfields and scattered oaks, now stand rows of craftsman-style homes, with vinyl siding the color of beach sand, a man-made lake ringed by imported palms, and a clubhouse painted in soft pastels that somehow always looks freshly pressure-washed. They have matching black mailboxes, identical landscaping packages, and of course, an HOA that believes its authority extends to the wind itself. I never paid them much mind. Our deed predates their development by 7 decades. Legally, we're separate worlds, divided by a simple 4-strand barbed wire fence and a shared dirt road that ends at my gate. But last spring, a white luxury SUV began appearing along that fence line with unsettling regularity. The driver, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on perfectly highlighted hair, would slow to a crawl, peer over the wire, and jot notes as if surveying for a shopping mall. The first time she waved, I lifted a hand in polite acknowledgement from the seat of my tractor. The second time, she leaned across the passenger seat and called out bright and breezy, "Mr. Hayes, have you ever considered collaborative use of underutilized green space?" I killed the engine and walked over, boots crunching on gravel. "Ma'am, that's not green space. That's where my bulls eat, sleep, breed, and occasionally settle their differences. It's very much utilized." She laughed, a light tinkling sound that suggested I'd made a clever joke. I hadn't. Her name, I soon learned, was Karen Delaney, newly elected president of the Summerhill Crossings Homeowners Association. She had ideas, big ones, and those ideas involved a community connector road that would link the back cul-de-sac of her subdivision to Hilltop Drive on the far side of my property. A shortcut, she called it. Efficient, modern, beneficial to property values all around. The most direct route, according to her glossy renderings, cut straight through the heart of my southeast pasture. I listened the first time she explained it, standing there in pressed khakis and wedge heels that sank slightly into the soft shoulder. I nodded while she spoke of traffic flow and emergency access and rising real estate trends. Then I told her as plainly as I knew how that no such road would ever cross my land without a signed easement, fair compensation, and my enthusiastic consent, none of which were on offer. She smiled the way people do when they believe disagreement is merely a temporary misunderstanding. "We'll circle back," she said, sliding her sunglasses down. "I'm sure we can find a neighborly solution." That was the beginning. Not long after, my oldest son Grant showed me a screenshot from the HOA's private Facebook group, a meeting agenda titled Vehicular Access Improvement Initiative, with bullet points about connective infrastructure and potential shared easements. Then my younger boy found the first orange survey flags. A week later, bright plastic ribbons, fluttering like warnings along a line that marched boldly across my grass. I stood there in the evening light, one boot on either side of a cedar post, older than most of the houses behind me, and felt something tighten in my chest. The flags weren't from the county. They weren't from any utility. They were from people who had convinced themselves that wanting something badly enough made it theirs. I pulled every flag that night and stacked them neatly on the clubhouse porch with a note in black marker, "Private property, no trespassing." I thought that might end it. But Karen Delaney wasn't the kind of woman who accepted no as a final answer. She was the kind who saw it as the opening bid in a negotiation she intended to win. And so, beneath a wide sky turning from gold to indigo, the trouble truly began. The first real warning came not in words, but in bright orange flags. Ben spotted them one afternoon while riding the four-wheeler back from checking water troughs. He killed the engine beside me in the barn and held one up like evidence. Little plastic ribbons on thin wire stakes lined out in a gentle curve that started near the south fence and marched straight across the pasture toward Hilltop Drive. They fluttered innocently in the breeze, but to me they looked like the opening salvos of an invasion. I walked the line that evening with Boomer trotting ahead, nose to the ground. The flags were spaced every 50 feet or so, driven deep enough that someone had used a proper marker driver. No utility markings, no county logos, just anonymous orange. The path they traced would slice through the best grazing ground we had, right where the bulls liked to bed down in the heat of the day. I pulled every one of them, bundled them like kindling, and left them stacked on the clubhouse steps the next morning with a note: "Private property. Do not enter." For a few days, quiet returned. The wind moved through the tall blue stem again, without interruption. Jasper grazed near the ridge, whitehide gleaming against green, and the world felt balanced once more. Then came the tire tracks. Fresh ruts appeared along the old service path that parallels the fence, deep enough to suggest something heavier than a passenger car. I followed them on foot until they stopped at the corner gate, the one I keep padlocked, since a storm took out the original post years ago. Someone had leaned a contractor's sign against it. "Preliminary work zone. Permitted entry only." I stared at the sign a long moment, feeling the sun burn the back of my neck. Then I picked it up, snapped it cleanly across my knee, and tossed the pieces into the bed of my truck. That same evening, I drove into Summerhill Crossings. The clubhouse lights glowed warm behind sheer curtains. Inside, wine glasses clinked, and laughter spilled out onto the manicured lawn. Karen spotted me the moment I stepped through the door. She excused herself from a cluster of polo shirts and came toward me with that practiced smile. "Malcolm, what a lovely surprise." We were just wrapping up our monthly social. I didn't smile back. I found survey flags on my land and a sign claiming permitted entry. Her expression didn't falter. "Oh, those must be from the preliminary alignment study. Nothing official yet, just data collection for the county's long-range plan. There is no county plan that involves my pasture." She tilted her head, sympathetic. "Actually, the Regional Development Council has recommended connective infrastructure for growing areas like ours. It's all about safety and efficiency. Your route is the most logical corridor." "My route," I repeated, meaning my private property. She placed a light hand on my forearm, as if we were old friends sorting a minor misunderstanding. "Think of it as shared community benefit. Property values rise for everyone when access improves." I removed her hand gently but firmly. "Karen, unless you have an easement signed by me and recorded at the courthouse, you are trespassing. Tell your surveyors to stay on their side of the fence." A flicker of something irritation, maybe calculation, crossed her face before the smile returned. "Let's not escalate to threats, Malcolm. We're neighbors." "That's exactly why I'm asking nicely," I said. "Next time I won't ask." I turned and walked out. Behind me, conversation resumed as though nothing had happened. Back home, I checked every gate and post by flashlight. One corner brace showed fresh gouges, metal scraped against wood, the kind of mark left by a careless bucket or a hurried backhoe. The bulls were restless that night. Even old Jasper paced the fence line, ears swiveling toward the ridge, where the subdivision lights glowed faintly against the dark. I stood in the barn doorway a long while, listening to the low rumble of their breathing and the occasional huff of unease. Boomer pressed against my leg, a silent sentinel. "Don't worry, boys," I told them quietly. "No one's paving your home while I'm still breathing." But even as the words left my mouth, doubt crept in like ground fog. I'd spent years in uniform believing reasonable people could be reasoned with. Experience had taught me otherwise, yet old habits die hard. 2 mornings later, pink flags replaced the orange ones, this time straighter, more official-looking, driven in with metal whiskers that caught the sunrise like tiny accusations. And parked just beyond my locked gate sat Karen's white SUV engine, idling, hazard lights blinking. She stepped out as I approached, a vest over her blouse, clipboard hugged to her chest like armor. "Morning, Malcolm, just verifying the revised alignment with the latest township data." I stopped 10 feet away, hands in my pockets to keep them still. "You're marking my land again." "There is ongoing discussion about unincorporated parcels," she said smoothly. "We're simply preparing options. There is no discussion. This is Hazeland, always has been." She offered that patient smile again. "You'll receive formal notice of cooperative planning soon. Our goal is inclusion, not confrontation." Boomer growled low from the porch. I unlatched the gate, swung it open, just enough to step through, then closed and locked it again between us. "Take your flags. Take your SUV and take your cooperative planning back to your side of the fence before my bulls decide to investigate the noise." For the first time, her smile slipped. She glanced toward the pasture where Jasper had lifted his massive head, watching us with dark, unblinking eyes. "I'd hoped we could handle this amicably," she said. I leaned on the top rail. "We still can. All you have to do is respect the boundary that's been here since before your neighborhood existed." She climbed back into her vehicle, without another word. The SUV backed away, kicking up dust, but every pink flag remained stubborn sentinels in my grass. That night, I pulled them all again. This time, I drove them straight to the clubhouse and left them in a neat pyramid on the welcome mat, topped with a single sheet of paper. "Final warning." I thought that might finally get the message across. But messages, like fences, only work when both sides agree to honor them. And Karen Delaney had never been much for agreement. The quiet didn't last. 2 days after I left the pyramid of pink flags on the clubhouse porch, I was in town picking up feed when Ben called. His voice was low, controlled, the way it gets when he's trying not to shout. "Dad, they're back and they've got machines." I made the drive in record time, tires spitting gravel as I turned onto our road. Dust hung in the air like a warning cloud before I even reached the gate. There they were, a yellow skid steer, a flatbed loaded with rebar and concrete forms, and 2 men in orange safety vests already at work. One was cutting the bottom strand of barbed wire with heavy-duty bolt cutters, while the other held a post hole digger like he was about to plant a garden. Ben stood in front of them, phone raised, recording every move. Boomer barked non-stop from the porch steps. The herd had clustered at the far end of the pasture, heads up, ears forward, unsettled but not yet panicked. I stepped out of the truck and walked straight toward the men, boots deliberate on the dry earth. "Turn those machines off, now." The man with the bolt cutters froze blade halfway through the wire. His partner raised both hands. "Easy, mister. We were told this was cleared and permitted." HOA said the landowner had agreed to a shared easement. "Agreed," I repeated, voice low and hard. "I'm the landowner, and I never agreed to anything." Ben moved beside me, still filming. "I told them the same thing, Dad. They wouldn't listen." Before either man could answer, Karen's white SUV rolled up the road and stopped behind the flatbed. She stepped out in a crisp, navy blazer, heels sinking slightly into the soft shoulder, a smile already forming. "Malcolm, perfect timing. Just a little mix-up with the schedule. We're on a tight deadline with the contractors, but we can absolutely adjust." I didn't return the smile. "You're cutting my fence. You're bringing heavy equipment onto my land without permission. That's not a mix-up. That's trespassing." She waved a hand as if brushing away a nut. "We filed a zoning variance and a notice of intent. The county's long-range plan encourages shared infrastructure. It's all in alignment." "Alignment?" I stepped closer. Your alignment ends at my property line. Unless you have a signed easement with my name on it, you're breaking the law." Behind her, Jasper let out a deep rolling bellow from the hilltop. The sound carried across the pasture like distant thunder. Two more bulls, Murphy and Claymore, moved up beside him, broad shoulders, swaying tails flicking with agitation. Karen glanced back, her smile faltering for the first time. She cleared her throat and turned to the contractors. "Gentlemen, let's wrap up for today. We'll reschedule." They didn't argue. Tools clattered into the flatbed. The skid steer's engine died, and within minutes, the whole crew was retreating down the road, leaving behind a ragged gap in the fence, and the smell of diesel in the air. Karen lingered a moment longer. "This isn't over, Malcolm. We'll find a legal path forward. Then you'd better find it somewhere else," I said. "Because you're not going to find it here." She climbed into her SUV and drove off without another word. That night, I worked until the stars came out. Grant and Ben joined me, welding extra steel panels across the breach, running new tension wire, embracing every post with fresh cedar stakes. The bulls watched from a distance, dark shapes against the moonlit grass, their breathing steady but watchful. We finished just before midnight. The temporary barrier wasn't pretty, but it was solid enough to hold the herd, until we could pour permanent posts the next week. I stood on the ridge for a long time, looking down at the patchwork repair and the quiet subdivision lights beyond. The air smelled of fresh cut wire and welding smoke, but beneath it was something else, something older. The scent of earth that had never been paved, of grass that had never known a bulldozer. I thought about my grandfather, who'd driven those first posts with nothing but a post-hole digger and a promise to himself that this land would stay free. I thought about my boys, who'd grown up knowing the difference between a fence and a wall, between ownership and entitlement. And I knew deep in my bones that Karen Delaney wasn't going to stop. She'd just been given a setback, not a surrender. The next morning, I reinforced the gate with a heavy-duty chain and a new padlock. I added warning signs every 20 feet, along the repaired section, large red letters on white plastic that read, "Private property, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted." Then I walked the entire perimeter one more time, Boomer at my heels, and spoke quietly to the bulls as I passed. "Stay sharp, boys," I said, "they're not done yet." And somewhere in the distance, Jasper answered with a low rumbling huff, as if to say he already knew. The line had been drawn. Now we'd see who crossed it first. The dawn broke heavy and humid, the kind of morning where the air clings to your skin and the sun seems reluctant to climb. I was already out walking the eastern perimeter with a thermos of black coffee when Grant's call came through. "Dad, get down here quick. They're not surveying this time. They're digging." I didn't waste words. I ran to the truck, Boomer leaping into the passenger seat before I even turned the key. By the time we crested the ridge above the south pasture, the low growl of diesel engines filled the valley like an insult. A full-sized bulldozer, bright yellow blade gleaming, sat in the middle of my grass, carving a shallow trench straight across the slope where the bulls usually rested in the morning shade. Behind it, a compact track loader idled, waiting its turn. Two surveyors in neon vests stretched a tape measure along the fresh cut, while a third man directed the operator with hand signals. And there, standing on the edge of the destruction, like a project manager at a ribbon cutting, was Karen Delaney. Wedge heels planted firmly in my dirt red blazer, vivid against the green, a takeaway latte cupped in one manicured hand. I slammed the truck door hard enough to echo across the field and strode toward them. Each step felt heavier than the last, the ground itself seeming to protest beneath my boots. "Shut it down," I called out, voice carrying over the engine noise. "All of it, now." The operator glanced up, hesitated, then looked to Karen. She lifted a hand, calm, dismissive, and motioned for him to continue. The blade dropped another 6 inches, biting deeper into the earth. I didn't slow. I walked straight to the dozer, climbed the track halfway, and pounded on the cab glass. "You're on private property. You're destroying agricultural land. Turn this machine off before you become personally liable for every inch of damage." The operator, a young man with sunburned cheeks and uncertain eyes, killed the engine. Silence rushed in, broken only by the tick of cooling metal and the distant lowing of disturbed cattle. Karen marched over heels, stabbing the torn sod. "Malcolm, this is getting dramatic. We're simply initiating preliminary grading under the development variance. Retroactive permits are common in phased projects." "Retroactive?" I stepped down from the dozer, facing her squarely. You tore out 30 feet of my fence yesterday. You have no easement, no permit, no permission. This is felony trespass." She gave a short, incredulous laugh. "It's a strip of grass. Your bulls will barely notice." From the ridge above us, Jasper answered with a deep, resonant bellow that rolled down the hillside like artillery. He stood broadside to the machine's passive, head-lowered, nostrils flaring. Murphy and Claymore flanked him, shifting restlessly, ears pinned back. The entire herd had moved to higher ground, watching the intrusion with the stillness of animals deciding whether to fight or flee. Karen's gaze flicked toward them, and for the first time I saw real unease tighten her features. I turned to the crew. "Pack your equipment and leave. Tell whoever signed your work order that insurance adjusters are going to have a busy week." They didn't wait for Karen's permission. Engines restarted, blades lifted, and within minutes the machines were retreating toward the subdivision, leaving behind a raw scar of red clay across my pasture, and a fence reduced to scattered posts and tangled wire. Karen lingered, arms crossed, now latte forgotten in her hand. "You're making this difficult for everyone, Malcolm. The county wants growth. The community wants connectivity. You're standing in the way of progress." "Progress doesn't get to bulldoze a man's livelihood without asking," I said. "You crossed a line today, legal, moral, and otherwise." She opened her mouth, closed it, then simply turned and walked back to her SUV. The door slammed harder than I'd ever heard from her before. I stood alone in the sudden quiet, surveying the damage. The trench was shallow but deliberate, 20 feet wide, already eroding at the edges where the blade had scraped topsoil away. Tire ruts crisscrossed the feeding area. A section of fence lay flattened like a broken spine. Grant and Ben arrived minutes later, faces grim. We worked through the heat of the day, reinforcing what we could, dragging steel panels from the barn, welding temporary braces, piling hay bales as a visual barrier. The bulls stayed on the far ridge, watching us with dark, patient eyes. By dusk, the breach was contained, but the pasture carried fresh wounds. The air smelled of diesel and torn earth, and every breath tasted like violation. That night I sat on the porch long after the boys had gone inside. Boomer rested his head on my knee, warm and steady. The subdivision lights twinkled across the valley like a distant city that had forgotten it was built beside open land. I thought about calling the sheriff right then, filing charges, forcing the issue. But something held me back. Maybe the old military habit of gathering intelligence before committing forces. Maybe the stubborn hope that reason might still prevail. Whatever it was, it felt increasingly like a mistake. Because the next morning, before the dew had even burned off the grass, the temporary barricade we'd built lay scattered, panels shoved aside, tension wires snapped, hay bales knocked flat. Hoof prints circled the gap in wide, deliberate loops. Deep, heavy prints that could only belong to Jasper and the others. The bulls had tested the weakness we'd left, and they'd found it wanting. I stood there in the pale light, coffee growing cold in my hand, and felt the balance shift. The fence was no longer just a boundary. It was a battle line, and both sides, human and bovine, were done pretending otherwise. The barricade we'd thrown together overnight was never meant to be permanent, just a stopgap of steel panels, hay bales, and fresh tension wire, until we could set new posts and pour concrete. But the bulls saw it differently. They saw weakness. They smelt the lingering diesel and the sharp tang of human intrusion. And they remembered every rev of an engine, every snapped wire, every foreign footprint on their ground. I found the wreckage at first light. Panels lay twisted like tinfoil. Wire coiled across the grass in useless loops. Hoof prints, deep, deliberate, circled the breach in wide arcs, as though Jasper had paced there for hours, testing, deciding. Murphy's lighter, faster prints overlapped them, impatient and bold. Claymore's heavier impressions pressed deepest, a statement of raw power. They hadn't wandered far. The three of them stood together on the near ridge, heads high, watching the subdivision lights fade as dawn crept in. The rest of the herd clustered behind them, restless but obedient. They weren't lost. They were waiting. I didn't panic. Cattle don't charge without reason. They move when something feels wrong, when instinct overrides training. I'd raised these boys from calves, taught them voice commands, bucket manners, respect for the gate. But respect only holds when the world respects back. Boomer's sharp bark pulled my eyes eastward. A thin column of dust rose along the dirt track that skirts the pasture. Too early for feed delivery, too deliberate for a lost driver. Then came the engines. Multiple. Music thumping faintly through open windows. I grabbed binoculars from the truck and climbed the ridge for a better view. What I saw made my stomach drop. 4 HOA vehicles, sleek sedans and SUVs, had turned off the paved road and were driving straight into the pasture through the very gap the bulls had widened. They bounced slowly over ruts and hillocks like sightseers on safari. One had a lawn sign protruding from the rear window, future site of community connector. Another blasted pop music loud enough to scatter birds from the oaks, and leading the convoy, nosed halfway down the slope. Where the bulldozer trench still scarred the earth was Karen's white luxury SUV. She stood outside it now, red blazer, bright against the green phone held high, filming herself as she gestured grandly at the landscape. They weren't just trespassing. They were celebrating. I radioed Grant and Ben, voice tight, "South Breach, now." Then I jumped in the truck and floored it down the slope, horn blaring. But I was too late to stop what came next. Jasper moved first. He came over the ridge like a white avalanche, slow at first, then gathering speed, shoulders rolling, head low. The ground seemed to tremble with each stride. Claymore flanked him to the west, ears flat, tail lashing. Murphy shot ahead on the right, younger and faster, cutting off any retreat. The nearest sedan, a silver Kia, tried to reverse, too slow. Jasper hit it broadside with the full force of 2,000 pounds. The impact sounded like a shotgun blast inside a tin shed. The driver's door crumpled inward, glass exploding outward in a glittering cloud. The car rocked violently on its suspension, before settling with a groan. The driver scrambled out the passenger side, stumbling, face pale with shock. Karen's scream cut through the chaos, high, raw, nothing like her usual polished tone. She bolted toward her SUV, but Murphy was already there, blocking the path, snorting hot breath across the hood. She skidded to a stop, heels sliding in loose dirt. I braked hard beside the wreckage, leapt out, and ran toward the bulls. "Jasper, easy boy, stand." He paused, chest heaving, dark eyes fixed on the intruders. Steam rose from his nostrils in the cool morning air. I stepped between him and the next vehicle. An Audi, now spinning tires in futile reverse, and raised both arms wide. "Back, all of you, back away," slowly. Grant and Ben roared up in the side-by-side portable gates, and a grain bucket rattling in the bed. Ben jumped out with the bucket, shaking it hard, the familiar rattle that always brought them running for feed. Grant held the long sorting stick high, not as a weapon, but as a clear signal of authority. The bulls hesitated, instinct warred with training. Claymore lowered his head and hooked the Audi's front bumper with one sweeping motion. The plastic cracked like gunfire. The entire fascia lifted and tore free, dangling by wires. The driver screamed and abandoned the car, sprinting toward the tree line. Karen had retreated behind her open SUV door, phone still clutched in white knuckles, voice cracking as she shouted into it. "We're under attack. Send animal control. Send the sheriff now." I moved steadily toward Jasper, voice low and firm. "Come on, big man. That's enough. Come on home." He huffed once more, a deep rumble that vibrated through my boots, then turned slow, deliberate, and started back up the slope. Murphy and Claymore followed, heads high, tails flicking triumph rather than rage. The HOA convoy fled in reverse, doors still open, tires spinning dirt as they raced for the road. Karen was the last to leave, limping slightly after a heel snapped, blazer torn at the elbow. She didn't look back. Silence settled, broken only by the tick of cooling engines and the distant lowing of the herd. 2 vehicles lay wrecked in my pasture, doors staved in windshields, spider-webbed bumpers scattered like broken toys. Tire ruts scarred the grass in frantic figure eights. I stood there a long moment, hands on my knees, breathing hard, not from running but from the weight of what had just happened. The bulls hadn't attacked out of malice. They'd defended their home. And in doing so, they'd drawn a line in the dirt that no survey flag, no variance, no clipboard could ever erase again. Grant clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You okay, Dad?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah. But Karen just learned something we've known all along." Ben looked toward the retreating dust cloud. "What's that?" "That some boundaries aren't negotiable." We spent the next hours repairing what we could, towing the abandoned cars to the fence line, with chains and the tractor resetting panels running new wire. The bulls grazed calmly now, as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. The fight was no longer just about land. It was about who got to decide what land means. The aftermath hit like a second storm. By midday, the HOA's private Facebook group had exploded. Screenshots flooded my phone, posts from board members, frantic captions over blurry photos of crumpled doors and shattered glass. Headlines screamed in all caps, Farmers' dangerous bulls attack, peaceful residents and HOA president nearly killed. During routine site visit, Karen's pinned post was the worst, a carefully composed paragraph painting herself as the victim of unprovoked aggression by unrestrained livestock, complete with a photo of her torn blazer sleeve and a dramatic close-up of her scraped elbow. Comments poured in by the dozens: outrage, fear, demands for petitions, calls for animal control to remove the threat. Someone even speculated that I was running an illegal fighting ring operation. The paranoia spread faster than wildfire in dry grass. They filed formal complaints that same afternoon, one with county animal control, another with code enforcement claiming my bulls were vicious and at large, a public safety hazard requiring immediate quarantine or euthanasia. I didn't waste time on social media rebuttals. I didn't have an account anyway. Instead, I gathered every scrap of evidence. We had Ben's phone video showing the HOA vehicles driving uninvited through the breached fence. Time-stamped trail cam stills of the convoy crossing the boundary. Photos of the destroyed fence sections and the bulldozer trench. Copies of every written warning I'd ever sent. Then I made the call I'd been saving. Marcus Langford picked up on the second ring. "Hayes," he said, voice warm with recognition. "Heard you've got yourself a range war. Something like that. Need a favor, brother. Name it." I told him everything. The flags, the bulldozers, the deliberate trespass, the bulls finally saying enough. When I finished, there was a long pause. "You still got that old debt from Kandahar hanging over me?" he asked. "Thought you'd never bring it up." He laughed. "I'll be there tomorrow with the county drone and a full inspection kit. Let's document this properly." True to his word, Marcus rolled in the next morning in an official Ford pickup, county emblem on the door, drone case in the bed. He was taller than I remembered, hair more gray than black now, but the grip was still iron when we shook hands. We didn't bother with coffee. He launched the drone while Ben synced the live feed to a laptop on the tailgate. Within an hour, we had crystal clear 4K footage, overhead shots of the trench tire ruts, crisscrossing prime, grazing the exact path the HOA vehicles took through the gap. Satellite overlays showed the before and after of the fence line, intact 1 week, demolished the next. Marcus whistled low. "This isn't gray area, Malcolm. This is textbook criminal trespass and agricultural interference. HOA claims the bulls are the danger," he snorted. "Bulls doing bull things on their own fenced land. That's not danger, that's nature. The danger was the idiots who drove into a livestock pasture like it was Disneyland. That afternoon, we filed everything. Sheriff's report for trespass and property destruction. Formal complaint against the HOA for livestock endangerment, copies sent to the State Agriculture Board. I attached the original 1952 deed, our current livestock registration, and Marcus's preliminary inspection notes. Then I emailed the entire package directly to the HOA board with a simple subject line: Notice of legal action pending. Karen replied within minutes, not with apology or retreat, but with a cease and desist letter drafted by their attorney. It accused me of weaponizing dangerous animals, demanded immediate removal of all large livestock, and threatened countersuit for vehicular damage and emotional distress. I forwarded it to Marcus. He read it on his phone and laughed out loud. "She's swinging wild now. That municipal nuisance clause she cites only applies inside its incorporated limits. Your land's zoned rural agricultural, grandfathered in since before zip codes existed. This won't survive first contact with a judge." But I knew she wasn't aiming for a quick courtroom loss. She was playing for time, for headlines, for enough public pressure to force the county to act. So I raised the stakes. I ordered a full perimeter upgrade, heavier steel posts, reinforced cattle panels, double gate systems with livestock-proof latches. Every 50 feet, I mounted new signs. Bigger, bolder. Private agricultural property. Active, county investigation, trespassers will be prosecuted. Grant printed enlarged trail cam photos beneath each sign. Karen's SUV crossing the line, the bulldozer blade, biting earth, Jasper, standing sentinel. No captions needed. The images spoke louder than any argument. Then I filed the injunction. With Marcus's sworn affidavit, the drone footage, Ben's video, and 70 years of unbroken deeds. We walked into county court and requested an emergency temporary restraining order barring any HOA member or contractor from setting foot on my land. The clerk who took the paperwork looked over her glasses at the stack of evidence. An HOA trying to pave through a registered bull pasture, she muttered. Lord, they must be new around here. 3 days later, the judge signed it. Effective immediately, Karen Delaney and the entire Summerhill Crossings HOA were legally prohibited from entering my property. Violation would mean contempt fines, possible jail time. I stood on the porch that evening, watching the new fence posts glint in the setting sun like ranks of soldiers. The bulls grazed peacefully again, Jasper's white hide catching the last light as he moved along the boundary, calm but watchful. Grant joined me, cold beer in hand. Think she respect the order. I took a long drink. She'll test it. People like Karen always do. Ben leaned on the rail beside us, and when she does, I looked out over the pasture, our pasture, and felt the weight of 3 generations settle on my shoulders like a warm, familiar coat. Then she'll learn what happens when you keep pushing a line that was never yours to move. The wind moved through the grass, carrying the clean scent of earth and hay. For the first time in weeks, the land felt steady beneath us again. But we all knew the quiet was only the space between thunderclaps. Karen wasn't finished. She was just reloading. The temporary restraining order felt like the first deep breath after weeks underwater. For a few days, the ridge stayed quiet. No unfamiliar engines growled along the fence line. No bright flags fluttered in my grass. The bulls settled back into their rhythms, Jasper claiming his favorite shade tree at midday, Murphy chasing crows from the water trough, Claymore standing sentinel on the high ground like a living monument. Even boomers stopped barking at shadows. But I knew better than to trust the calm. Karen wasn't the retreating kind, she was the regrouping kind. A week after the judge's signature dried on the order, a sleek black sedan pulled up to my gate. A younger man in a tailored sport coat stepped out, leather folder in hand, smile polished to a showroom shine. Mr. Hayes, Daniel Price. I've been retained as advisory counsel for the Summerhill Crossings HOA. May I have a moment? I leaned against the gatepost, arms folded. You're on the right side of the fence. Keep it that way. He nodded, unfazed. Understood. I'm here to explore a peaceful resolution. Emotions have run high on both sides. My clients believe we can still find common ground, perhaps a limited easement with generous compensation. I almost laughed. Your clients tore down my fence, endangered my livestock, and got exactly what they invited when they drove into a bull pasture. There's no common ground left to find. Price shifted his weight. There's concern that your response reinforcing the perimeter, the signage, the trail cameras could be seen as provocative. Provocative, I echoed. I'm protecting what's mine. After your people ignored every warning, every law, and a court order to boot. He opened the folder, revealing glossy renderings of the proposed road, smooth pavement, curving gently through what used to be open pasture. The community still supports connectivity. A countersuit is being prepared. We'd prefer to avoid that ugliness. I looked past him to where Jasper grazed in the distance, white against green, utterly unconcerned with renderings or lawsuits. Tell your clients they've already crossed every line worth crossing, I said. They can prepare whatever they want. I'll see them in court. Price closed the folder slowly. You're confident. I've got deeds older than your subdivision, footage of every trespass, and a judge who's already ruled once in my favor. Confidence isn't the word. He nodded once, climbed back into his sedan, and drove away without another word. That same afternoon, Marcus called. County's escalating the investigation, he said. Your injunction triggered a full land use review. Inspection teams coming out tomorrow, 3 trucks, clipboards, the works. They want to document everything before the HOA tries any more stunts. Bring them on, I said. The more paperwork, the better. They arrived at dawn the next day, a small convoy of white pickups with county seals. Marcus led the way, waving as he stepped out. The inspectors, 2 men and a woman in khakis and sturdy boots, moved with quiet efficiency. We walked the entire southern perimeter while the drone buzzed overhead. They flagged every tire rut, photographed the old bulldozer trench now softening with new grass, measured the repaired fence sections down to the inch. When we reached the spot where the HOA vehicles had entered during the celebration, the lead inspector knelt and ran a hand over the compacted soil. This is clear evidence of unauthorized, heavy access, she said. Soil compaction alone will take years to recover fully in an active grazing zone. Another inspector nodded toward the new double gates. Your repairs exceed code. Livestock containment is exemplary. By noon, they had everything: GPS coordinates, soil samples, hundreds of photos, drone overlays. Marcus handed me a preliminary report thick enough to stop a bullet. "This goes straight to the State Ag Board," he said. "Category 2 agricultural interference. That's not a slap on the wrist, that's a career ender for anyone pushing bogus variances." We shook hands as they loaded up. "You didn't just save your ranch, Malcolm," he told me quietly. "You reminded a whole county what rural zoning actually means." That evening, I added 3 more signs along the fence, larger this time, with bold black lettering, under active state and county investigation. No entry without express, written permission, violators, subject to criminal prosecution. Grant-mounted laminated prints, beneath them crisp drone shots of the trespass paths, side-by-side comparisons of the pasture before and after the damage. Word traveled fast. Linda, a neighbor from the far edge of Summerhill Crossings, and one of the few decent souls in the HOA, texted me that night. "Karen's been quiet. Board canceled the next meeting. Rumor is their lawyer told them to stop all communication until the investigations close." I stared at the message a long time, then looked out at the darkening pasture. The bulls moved like pale ghosts in the twilight, grazing without urgency. Quiet was good, but I knew Karen. Quiet was just the sound of someone sharpening their next move. A few nights later, Ben found a new banner draped across the clubhouse fence, visible from the ridge, with binoculars. "Community Connector Preview Day, food, fun, family-friendly tour, bring the kids." And in smaller letters beneath, "Site access via scenic Hayes Lane route." My blood went cold. Hayes Lane, my pasture. The date was set for the coming Saturday. They weren't backing down. They were throwing a party on ground they'd been ordered to stay off. I set the binoculars down slowly. The restraining order was ironclad on paper, but paper doesn't stop entitlement. Only consequences do. And consequences, I realized, were about to arrive in the form of 2,000 pounds of white muscle, with very long memories. Saturday was coming. So were the bulls. Saturday arrived with the kind of bright, innocent sunshine that makes people believe nothing bad can happen on a weekend. From the ridge, I watched them gather. Minivans and SUVs lined the shoulder near the clubhouse. Folding chairs unfolded on manicured lawns. Someone set up a portable canopy and a folding table piled with cookies and lemonade. Kids darted between legs with balloons tied to their wrists. A banner flapped cheerfully in the breeze, "Community Connector Preview Day. Fun for the whole family." Karen moved through the crowd like a seasoned politician, red blazer crisp, despite the heat, smile, wide clipboard replaced by a wireless microphone. She greeted families, posed for selfies, pointed toward my pasture, as if it were already hers to give away. I stood at the new double gate with Boomer beside me, arms folded, saying nothing. Jasper grazed just inside the fence line, close enough to hear the distant laughter, close enough to watch. At 5 o'clock sharp, the convoy started. 4 vehicles eased off the pavement and turned down the old service track. 2 Subarus, a white passenger van, with Summerhill family stickers on the windows, and bringing up the rear, Karen's familiar white luxury SUV. Windows down, music playing, phones held high to capture the scenic route. They slowed at the gap we had deliberately left, only partially repaired, wide enough for a vehicle, narrow enough to require deliberate intent. The lead Subaru hesitated, driver glancing at the bright red "No Trespassing" signs and the laminated drone photos of their earlier trespass. Karen leaned out her window and waved them forward. "It's just a quick loop, everyone. Perfect photo opportunity." The Subaru nosed through. Then the second. The van. And finally Karen herself, turning her wheel sharply, tires biting into my grass, as she accelerated down the slope like a tour guide entering a national park. Jasper lifted his head. Murphy's ears flicked forward. Claymore shifted his massive bulk and began to move. I stepped forward and raised both arms, voice carrying across the field. "Turn around. You're violating a court order." The lead driver braked, uncertain. Karen didn't. She drove deeper, stopping midway down the trench line, stepping out with phone aloft, live streaming to whoever was watching back at the clubhouse. "Welcome, neighbors, to the future of Summerhill Crossings. This beautiful open space will soon connect us all." Her words cut off. Murphy had crested the low rise behind her, moving fast, lean muscle and raw speed in a white blur. He thundered down the slope, head low, horns forward, the ground shaking with each strike of his hoofs. Karen turned just in time to see him. The impact was catastrophic. 2,000 pounds of bull met luxury SUV at the rear passenger door. Metal folded like paper. The entire vehicle lurched sideways, tires lifting briefly off the ground before slamming back down. Glass shattered in a glittering spray. Airbags exploded inside with muffled pops. The side mirror cartwheeled through the air and landed 30 feet away. Karen screamed a sound I'd never heard from her before, primal and stripped of all polish. She stumbled backward, heel snapping clean off, blazer ripping at the seam as she caught herself on the fender. The other vehicles tried to reverse in panic. The van clipped a Subaru metal, screeching. Doors flew open as people spilled out, parents grabbing children, some running, some frozen in shock. I sprinted toward the chaos, shouting commands. Murphy, stand back. Grant and Ben roared up in the side-by-side, grain buckets rattling, sorting sticks raised high. Jasper and Claymore had positioned themselves across the escape route, calm, immovable tails, flicking slow warnings. They didn't charge. They simply blocked. Murphy circled the wrecked SUV once, snorting hot clouds of breath across the crumpled hood, then turned and trotted back up the slope as if satisfied his point had been made. Karen sat in the dirt beside her ruined vehicle, clutching a bleeding forearm where glass had sliced her. Makeup streaked down her face. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked small. Sirens rose in the distance. Someone had already called 911. I walked up slowly and stopped a safe distance away. You were warned, I said quietly. Court order, signs, trail cam, everything recorded. She looked up at me, eyes wide, voice trembling. You set them on me. No, Karen. You set yourself on them. You drove onto private land, past a restraining order, into an active livestock pasture again. The first sheriff's cruiser crested the hill, lights flashing. Deputy Travis Cole, someone I'd fished with more than once, stepped out, took one look at the scene, and shook his head. Malcolm, he said under his breath. She really do this? Every bit, cameras got it all. He nodded, then turned to Karen as paramedics approached. Ma'am, you're going to need to come with us. And you should probably stop talking until you have a lawyer. The totaled SUV was winched onto a flatbed an hour later. The other vehicles limped out, under their own power, escorted by deputies. Parents carried crying children back to the clubhouse. The banner lay trampled in the grass. News vans arrived by dusk. Drone footage from neighbors' phones was already circulating online. Headlines wrote themselves. HOA president's SUV destroyed by bull after alleged trespass. Karen meets Karma Ledgery SUV totaled on rancher's land. The comment sections filled with variations of the same refrain. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. I didn't watch any of it. Instead, I walked the pasture with the boys as the sun bled out across the horizon. The bulls grazed quietly again, the ground beneath them undisturbed, except for the fresh ruts soon to be filled by rain and time. Ben broke the silence first. Think it's finally over. I looked toward the subdivision, lights dimmer tonight, quieter. No, I said. But the next move isn't hers anymore. Grant smiled in the fading light. It's the courts. And the lands, I added. Because some lessons aren't taught by judges or gavels. They're taught by 2,000 pounds of muscle that has decided once and for all where the line is drawn. And this time Karen had crossed it at full speed. The courthouse smelled of old wood and floor wax, the kind of scent that reminds you justice has been grinding away in the same building for over a century. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as we filed into the small courtroom. Reporters filled the back rows. A few HOA board members sat stiffly on the plaintiff's side, avoiding eye contact. Karen Delaney arrived last. She wore a charcoal suit that hung loosely on her frame, a beige cervical collar around her neck, and oversized sunglasses that hid the fading bruises. The confident stride was gone. In its place was a careful, deliberate walk, as though every step cost her something. This was no longer a hearing for a restraining order. This was the full civil trial. Karen and the HOA had doubled down, filing suit against me for property damage to her SUV, medical expenses, emotional distress, and what their attorney called intentional endangerment through unrestrained, dangerous livestock. They wanted compensation, punitive damages, and a court order forcing me to remove all bulls from the property. My attorney, Helen Granger, a sharp woman in navy heels who'd known my late wife since college, leaned close as we took our seats. Remember short answers if the judge asks you directly. And try not to look satisfied when they play the video. I gave her a small nod. Judge Francis Leland entered, same gravel voice and no-nonsense gaze as before. She'd seen the preliminary evidence. Today, she would decide if the case even deserved to go to a jury. Karen's attorney, Daniel Price, stood first. He painted a dramatic picture, his client a dedicated public servant conducting legitimate community business, when suddenly set upon by ferocious, untrained animals, whose owner had deliberately allowed them to roam uncontained. He spoke of terror of shattered glass and twisted metal of a neighborhood living in fear. Then he rested confident. Helen rose calmly. Your Honor, the defense moves for dismissal and requests summary judgment in favor of Mr. Hayes. The evidence is undisputed. She clicked a remote. The large screen behind her came to life. Exhibit after exhibit rolled across it in merciless clarity. Drone footage of Karen's SUV deliberately turning off the paved road, crossing the boundary line past 3 prominent, no trespassing signs. Trail cam stills timestamped showing the exact moment her tires left county right-of-way and entered private pasture. Her own live stream video, recovered from her cracked phone, where she waved the convoy forward with a cheerful, "This beautiful open space will soon connect us all." The moment of impact, Murphy's shoulder striking sheet metal, the SUV rocking violently, airbags blooming. Veterinary and containment records confirming the bulls were healthy, registered, and at all times within their legally fenced enclosure. Side-by-side satellite images, the fence intact weeks earlier, then demolished by HOA hired equipment. A timeline of every written warning, every ignored court order. And finally, the temporary restraining order itself, signed by Judge Leland, served to Karen personally, 3 days before the preview day. When the last clip ended, the courtroom was silent, except for the low hum of the projector cooling down. Price cleared his throat. Your Honor, these videos lack critical context. The barrier was insufficient. Judge Leland leaned forward. Counsel, the barrier was insufficient because your clients destroyed it with a bulldozer. Then Ms. Delaney knowingly violated this court's order and drove back in. Price tried again. The animals were clearly aggressive. They were livestock, the judge said flatly, defending their territory against repeated uninvited intrusion. Mr. Hayes did not open the gate. He did not direct the animals. He warned repeatedly that entry was prohibited. Karen's voice broke the silence, thin and strained. Your Honor, he knew what those bulls could do. He wanted this to happen. Judge Leland turned to her. Did Mr. Hayes invite you onto his property that day? No. Did he remove any fencing to allow your access? No. Did you receive, read, and understand this court's restraining order prohibiting you from entering his land? Karen hesitated. Yes. Then the responsibility for what happened rests with the person who chose to ignore that order. Price sat down heavily. Helen stood one final time. Your Honor, we also request a finding of frivolous litigation and asks the court to award Mr. Hayes full restitution for fence repairs, lost grazing productivity, legal fees, and associated damages. Judge Leland reviewed the thick file in front of her, then looked out over the courtroom. This court finds that the plaintiff's claims are without merit. The evidence shows a clear pattern of deliberate trespass, property destruction, and willful violation of a lawful court order. The livestock involved acted within their enclosed pasture and posed no threat until the plaintiff placed herself in their presence against explicit prohibition. She turned to me. Mr. Hayes, you've comported yourself with remarkable restraint throughout this ordeal. Do you wish to address the court? I stood. Your Honor, my family has raised cattle on this land since 1952. We maintain our fences, register our stock, follow every regulation. I gave every possible warning, spoken, written, and finally through the courts. I never wanted anyone hurt. But I will not apologize for protecting what is ours. This land isn't just acreage. It's legacy. And some lines once drawn are not meant to be moved. The judge's expression softened just slightly. Motion to dismiss granted. Counterclaims denied. Judgment entered for the defendant, Malcolm Hayes. Plaintiffs are ordered to pay documented damages, including fence replacement, veterinary evaluations, and all court costs. The gavel fell sharp final. Karen remained seated as the courtroom emptied. She didn't look at me as I passed. The sunglasses stayed on, but her hands trembled in her lap. Outside, the late summer air felt clean, washed by a breeze off the distant hills. Grant and Ben waited by the truck with Boomer riding shotgun, tail thumping against the window. Ben grinned. That's it, I said. We drove home in silence for a while, windows down, the scent of cut hay drifting in. As we turned onto our road, the new fence caught the afternoon sun in straight posts, tight wire signs still bright. The pasture stretched wide and unbroken beyond it. And for the first time in months, it felt truly ours again. Not because a judge said so, but because the land and the bulls had never doubted it. A month passed like a slow exhale. The pasture healed in quiet ways. Rain softened the last ruts. New grass pushed green fingers through the scarred earth, and the trench where the bulldozer had bitten deepest filled with wild rye that waved silver in the evenings. The bulls moved with their old certainty again, Jasper claiming the high ridge at dawn, Murphy racing shadows along the fence, Claymore standing like a monument against the sunset. They no longer paced at strange hours or lifted their heads at every engine sound. The land had settled, and so had they. Karen Delaney resigned from the HOA presidency the week after the verdict, citing personal health concerns and a desire to focus on family. Her house went on the market 10 days later, a quick sale listing with professional photos that carefully cropped out any view of my pasture. I watched the moving trucks come and go from the ridge. One Saturday morning, Boomer resting his chin on the fence rail beside me. She was in the passenger seat of the lead truck, hair pulled back, sunglasses hiding her eyes. She never looked toward the field. Jasper watched her leave. He stood at the gate, massive and still, tough looking once, as the truck disappeared down Hilltop Drive. Then he turned and grazed as if a chapter had closed without needing words. We didn't press charges. The county offered criminal trespass, filing false reports, contempt of court, but I told them to let it rest. Justice had already spoken loud and clear. Some debts are paid in full when pride is the currency. Instead, we celebrated in the old way. We threw a cookout on a crisp autumn evening, the kind where the air smells of wood smoke, and the sky burns orange before giving way to stars. Long tables stretched across the yard. Grant tended the smoker, turning brisket that had grazed this very ground. Ben fired the grill for steaks thick enough to make a man proud. Neighbors came, old ranch families from down the road, a few quiet souls from Summerhill Crossings who'd stayed neutral through the storm and now wanted to shake my hand. Harold, the board member who'd once apologized outside the courthouse, brought a bottle of good bourbon and stood with me by the fire pit. I didn't speak up soon enough, he said again, eyes on the flames. Should have told her no from the start. You're here now, I replied, that counts. He nodded, clinked his glass against mine, and we drank to fences that hold and neighbors who learn. Later, the boys unrolled the bloodline map across the picnic table, my grandfather's original pencil sketch layered now with my father's notes and my own digital updates. Grant traced a finger along the southern boundary. We could open that creek grove for spring calving, he said. Plenty of shelter, good water. Ben leaned in. And run a new paddock rotation, give the southeast section a full year to recover. I watched them plan, voices low and serious, the firelight catching in their eyes the same way it had in mine decades ago. This wasn't just land to them. It was story, responsibility, future. My grandfather's words came back to me, then spoken the day he handed me the deed. This dirt doesn't belong to us, son. We belong to it. Our job is to leave it better than we found it, and to make sure nobody forgets whose turn it is to tend it. I'd kept that promise. We all had. The county closed their final investigation with a letter that now hangs framed in the barn beside Judge Leland's handwritten note. Official determination, property owner in full compliance. No further action required. Below it, the judge's words still make me smile on hard days. You reminded this county that the law lives in fences, in generations, in the quiet dignity of people who honor the land. These days, I walk the perimeter at sunrise, coffee in hand, Boomer trotting ahead. The new fence stands straight and strong, steel posts driven deep, wire-tight gates that latch with a satisfying clang. Trail cams still watch, but they mostly record deer at dusk and the occasional coyote slinking past. The signs remain, though faded now by weather. Private agricultural property protected since 1952. The bulls greet me with low huffs and gentle nudges, asking for a scratch behind the ear. Jasper's muzzle has gone grayer this year, but his eyes are still dark and wise. He remembers everything, the flags, the machines, the screams, the silence that followed. They all do. Land remembers too. Every hoofprint, every repaired post, every blade of grass that grew back stronger. And so do we. Today the pasture stretches wide and unbroken beneath a sky big enough for every story it's ever held. The boys talk of expanding the herd, Come spring of maybe building that new shed by the West Ridge. They speak of it the way young men do when they know deep down that the ground beneath them is steady, because someone fought to keep it that way. I stand at the gate sometimes and look across the ridge towards Summerhill Crossings, new houses, new families, new lives built on what used to be hayfields. They'll have their roads and their rules, but they'll also have a boundary they no longer test, because some lines once defended stay drawn forever. The wind moves through the grass carrying the clean scent of earth and the low, contented rumble of bulls at peace. This is home. This has always been home. And as long as there are Hayes men willing to stand at the fence, boots planted, hearts rooted, eyes on the horizon, it always will be.